Chapter 3. Back in the Day. I was born in the L&D, the Luton and Dunstable Hospital, in November 1982. I have an older brother. There's just 18 months between us. My first memories revolve around Mum. She was with my birth dad, Malcolm Yaxley, but they soon split up. Mum told me she was in a battered wives' hostel with both of us kids in those early days. I remember him later on, but we didn't call him Dad, we called him Malcolm. It must have been awkward for him. He only used to come to see us on birthdays and Christmases and such like. The man who is my dad, Tommy Lennon, got together with Mum when I was about 2. So from my earliest memories, Tommy was Dad, and Malcolm Yaxley was just the bloke who came along once or twice a year to bring us presents. He always had a quality car, Malcolm. I remember that much. I used to like him coming along on sports day when I was in the junior school in his nice sports car. I was too young to remember much, but by all accounts he sounded like a cruel, vindictive bastard. He stopped coming to see us when I was about 11 and died 2 or 3 years ago, I heard. In the early days of the EDL, the Times was doing a story exposing my identity. I'd always try to avoid it, but there came the time I was going to be revealed to the world, and the journalist called Stephen Bird found me. I met him in a pub in Farley Hill, the Parrot. He said he had tracked down my dad and told me that he was in Bulgaria, which was news to me. So I told him, stick his name in the article, Malcolm Yaxley. I thought someone would ring him up and ask what the hell his son is up to. That would be a laugh. When I had kids, I dropped the name Yaxley because I didn't want to carry on with it. Mum told me Malcolm had died, but I didn't know how she found out. There's a couple of times when I looked him up through Google, like you do, but to be honest, he was nothing to me. I think if I'd ever bumped into him, he'd have got a smack in the teeth. And remember that DNA doesn't make you a dad. My dad was and is Tommy Lennon, Scottish and Glaswegian, a great man and a real hard-working bloke too. My mum, Rita Carroll, is Irish. Her family came over here when she was a youngster. She's one of 8, a proper Irish Catholic family. She's a tiny thing, my mum, which is probably why I stopped growing when I was about 14. I got to 5'6" in good time, but that was that. Just a little chubby kid with a big attitude. My mum and Tommy worked really hard for us. He was a specialist pipe fitter who was always working away, here, there and everywhere. So Mum brought us up mostly, as she did, a lot of childminding and fostering too. Lots of times there were other kids in the house being looked after by my mum. She and Tommy never had kids together, and I sometimes think Mum was mindful of what having 2 families under one roof might do. But it matters not, because Tommy's my dad. We worked together for a lot of years. The first memories were of growing up in Lytham Drive in Stopsley and going to Wigmore Junior School, although my first vivid memory of it a real bad asthma attack. Then I nearly died. The next-door neighbour jumped over the fence and gave me mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. I can remember having a bloody nose from my brother as part of the whole incident, but Mum says that I got it wrong, that my brother wasn't even there. It's certainly in my memory banks, even though I was only about 2, and I still get occasional flashbacks from it, of being in the ambulance, even though the family can't believe it. I had asthma when I was younger. Mum and Tommy owned the house we lived in, and as a family we were very close to my Uncle June and Uncle Bill, who lived across the town in Farley Hill, and we moved back there to live with them at one point, while Mum and Dad were waiting for a new house to be built. We all mucked in with Aunt Jill and Bill and some other cousins, as families did back then. It was a very family-oriented part of the town, with a healthy mix of people from different backgrounds, and certainly in my younger days none of them was an issue. It still wouldn't be if one community didn't like to make it a problem. One of my friends from primary school was a Sikh lad called Jatin. It was quite funny years later, because when the police were turning my life upside down, they went to London, where Jatin owns a business, investigating a financial transaction we'd had. I'd bought something from him, nothing more than that. The police thought that because he was Asian, and I couldn't possibly have friends from that community, that I must have been up to some dodgy dealing, which just about sums them up. Justin rang me, saying not to worry, that they were just trying to find something, anything to stitch me up. He said the coppers told him that his boss was pulling his hair out because they couldn't pin anything on me. Funny. During that period, living back in Farley Hill, it was my first memory of being let loose, of being able to go out with my mates. Just kids, being mischievous and having fun. I was about 9 or 10 then. I'd build dens and all kinds of stuff from whatever stuff we could scavenge and collect. Healthy stuff. We still had to be back in the house early than the other kids, though. Mum was pretty strict like that, and it was the same when we moved back to Stopsley area, to Wigmore, for the next few years. There were woods nearby, and we'd hunt out planks and all kinds of rubbish and carry it for miles to build tree houses, just normal growing up. I got into motorbikes a little bit in my early teens. A neighbour moved next door, and he owned a Lotus and a Ferrari, very flash. He raced bikes professionally and had a Ducati, and then he brought this little Rev2Go track bike that he used to let us have a go on. After that, my dad got us trials bikes, but Mum and Dad were quite strict about when we could take them out. So, as you'd expect, we'd wait until they were out, then go burning round the estates, creating havoc, making a nuisance. I remember when Princess Diana died, my mum went to watch the funeral, and all we could think about was, great, Mum's out, and we were out bombing around on the motorbikes. The flash bloke with the sports car and the bikes ended up on the run for a massive fraud, apparently. There's always been a lot of crime in Luton, as you'll discover soon enough. At that time, going into my teens, I wasn't really aware of race or religion being any kind of an issue. Sure, there were colour-identified people, but it never registered as being a barrier to anything, not at first at least. Bury Park is an overwhelmingly Muslim enclave now, but we used to go there because there was a McDonald's and some shops which Mum used. Kenilworth Road, the home of Luton Town Football Club, is smack bang in the heart of Bury Park, which contributed to some of the later trials and tribulations when Luton Muslim radicals were the trailblazing poster boys for the Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, and me and my football pals were starting to stand up for the other side. It can't have been easy, but the police, as usual, managed to turn a difficulty into a disaster. Give coppers a 50-50 choice, and they seem to have close to 100% record of right loyalty, messing up things. The truth is that by the time the conflict became focused on religion and nationalism, there had been trouble brewing in Luton for many years. There was more about gang territory and activity than any disputes about faith and religion. When we were kids, Wigmore was a new school, and a big estate was built in Cutter's Green, right in the middle of the area, probably one of the largest estates to be built. A lot of Muslim families moved in, and when I was about 8, I was probably one of the first kids to become friends with some of them. There were also brothers Daniel and Dean Grosset, whose dad came from Trinidad originally. People talked about the current asylum crisis, but a proper early refuge family moved in a few doors from us as a result of the Bosnian conflict. Ammar's dad was killed over there, and he arrived amongst us with his mum. A good lad and successful story of a man too. The last time I saw him, he told me he was embarrassed as to how the British Muslims were acting. My pal Brusso and I, Paul Brisland, were glued at the hip for years, with my mum being quite strict and his mum letting him stay out until all hours. I'd often stay up at Brisso's and we'd be out on the street. One of my cousins, Declan Carroll, used to spend most weekends with us, and he knew the Grosseto boys. We were all good mates growing up, and I wasn't aware of the other kids being Muslim. I didn't know anything about their religion. It was just a simple fact that a lot of them were either Pakistani or Bangladeshi. My brother's best friend, at the time Dobbsy, Stephen Dobbs, has remained a close family friend all these years on. Lads like Big Mick and Abella, pals through thick and thin. We were all just a big melting pot of kids, and if there was any name-calling or radical bullying going on, then I wasn't aware of it. I do think, though, in hindsight, that there's probably a lesson to be learned in terms of cultures mixing. At that time, you had quite a slow influx of pupils from other nationalities and communities coming into the school at Wigmore, and I think that's when you're far more likely to see integration. Things changed quickly, though, and the problems started once we got into high school. That's when I became not so much aware of the religious issues yet, but certainly the prejudice and the physical difference between cultures and communities. My first school girlfriend, Bexy Ling, had a terrible, sad story. She was in our house when the news came that her dad had dropped dead at the gym from a heart attack. Beck's mum got terminal cancer not long after, and she moved away to Norwich to live with their older sister. When I was about 14, I had a girlfriend from an Irish family, Charlotte McCormack. Charlotte's best friend, Lisa Day, was going out with my pal Cameron, as in Cameron and Imran, the twins, whose family came here from Afghanistan. One day, Cameron's family went to see Lucy's mum to say that the relationship was killing their dad. He was dying from the shame of his son being with a white girl, a Christian girl. He did die eventually, but I doubt it was anything to do with that. But I remember seeing Lisa crying over it. They were forced to stop seeing each other, and that didn't seem right. It was particularly strange because with a big black community in Luton, mixed relationships were everywhere. Black girls with white boys, white girls with black boys. It was normal. There were lots of mixed-race young people. The changes kept on coming, and I remember suddenly that we weren't supposed to say Pakistanis anymore because some of the new pupils coming to our school were from Afghanistan. They would all be bussed in to their high school Puttridge, and they didn't live on the estate or in the area, which I suppose reflected the growing numbers within the Muslim community, meaning that they were having to be shipped out to schools 3 or 4 miles away. The first time I was aware of radical trouble would probably have been in the 9th year, when I was about 13. There was a growing gang mentality among the Muslim kids, mainly in that they hung out tightly and pretty exclusively together. We had a boy from Nigeria start school. He had moved to Luton from Leicester. He said the Muslims there didn't act like this, although I didn't quite know what he meant. Anyway, my high school mate, Dean Gilhenney, had a fight with a Pakistani pupil, a boy from the year above us, called Majid. You have to understand that this was normal knockabout school stuff. Boys had playground scraps and all that, always have and always will. Except this was different. This time it was very different. All the Muslim lads rushed Dean, younger ones, older ones. Dean was in year 9 with me, and even boys from year 11 attacked him, which never happened. They jumped him down on the school service road and they put him in hospital. There were about 20 of them. Police came to the school and the teachers had to put all the Muslim kids in one classroom because by then all of Dean's pals were suddenly looking for payback. From there on I was aware of the tensions more and more, but it was still generally about a gang mentality rather than having any religious overtones. When we got to year 11, I remember a young lad called Bowler, 2 years below me, but a game kid, and he got into a scrap with one of the Muslims, who was supposed to be a real hard nut, and whose brother were in the Gambino gang. We'll get to Luton's criminal gang shortly. All the Muslims in our year were going to rush young Bowler, and it ended with a big group of black and white lads getting together to say that no one was touching the kid. I had massive respect for this lad bowler. I can still picture him walking through the school with a can of Coke among the 20 Pakistani lads, all older than him. He threw the Coke all over them and called them a bunch of wankers and ran off laughing. He was game for sure. That wasn't the end of that. It never was, because quickly became clear that there was no such thing as a one-on-one fight where these lads were concerned. By the end of the school day, there was a big crowd of Pakistani men waiting outside the school. It's a wonder no one got killed. When I was about 15, my brother, who went to the Catholic high school, Cardinal Newman, not Puttridgebury like me, got jumped on, robbed and beaten up. He knew who had done it, and I went round to the ringleader's house. He was quite a bit older than us, about 19 or 20. A big group of us all used to congregate on Friday nights and hung out, and Cameron came along, which was usual for the Muslim lads who were our friends. This lad who jumped my brother had an Irish mum, but his dad was a Pakistani taxi driver, which I didn't know at the time. I've always been a bit more fiery than my brother, and despite him being the older one, I wasn't taking it laying down. We went round to his house. I knocked on the door and his mum answered, at which point I saw him look out of the window. His mum slammed the door shut just as Cameron pushed it, and his hand went straight through the glass. He ended up with stitches. I also used to hang about with some of the gypsy kids from the Travellers' site in Topsley. We found out there was a party at the Catholic Church Hall, which ironically was in Bury Park. Some of the other lads who jumped my brother were there, so a group of us went looking for them. We couldn't get in, and later, when they all started leaving and found just 4 of us still standing about, I got a few slaps for my trouble. The whole thing was no big deal, or at least it wasn't a big deal until we went to the school on Monday. As I said, I didn't know the race of the main lad's dad, but when I came out of the school, there was about 30 Pakistani men waiting for me. All of our teachers came out to try and diffuse things, and the police turned up too, so nothing happened. But these conflicts seemed to be building. It was strange. You could laugh and joke with the Muslim lads joining class, but once school was over, they were back in their community, among their own again. There was a barrier that just came down, and there was no moving it. I've not seen anything before or since to suggest the situation is going to improve either. Whatever rivals and tribal allegiances they had in their own communities between different mosques and sects, there was one common enemy that united them every time: non-Muslims. I don't see anything, not in our country, not across the world even, that contradicts that. I had Muslim mates I thought I could trust and rely on, but I've seen the look in their eyes, seen them shrug their shoulders when the line's been drawn in the sand. When it's back to the wall, Islam trumps everything. Every year just brought more instances of conflict between Muslim communities and everyone else. Every year you just became more and more aware of the widening differences and the fact there wasn't much common ground between us, not much at all.